The Orion Dawn floated silently above the blue and gold swirl of the planet Chorus, her silver hull glinting under the faint light of the system's twin suns. Inside, the corridors were alive, with the sounds of crew members preparing for another long haul through deep space. The ship's next mission would take them far beyond the established trade routes, out where maps faded into guesses and stars were nothing more than unmarked lights. Jonas Hale walked slowly through the main corridor, clutching the data pad. In his hand, his boots made a soft echo against the metal floor, a sound that usually comforted him. But today it only made his stomach feel heavier. The crew assignments had just been posted. He had checked them 3 times, certain there must be some kind of mistake. But no, the screen had shown the same thing every time. Cabin 14B. Lieutenant Slira Villari, Jonas Halojonas, didn't know much about the Villari species, except that they were tall, graceful, and covered in fine, feather-like fur that shimmered in different shades under light. He had seen only to Villari in person before, both in passing, both looking like they had stepped out of an alien art book, and now he was going to share a tiny crew cabin with one. For months, he tried to convince himself it wasn't a big deal. Space missions often paired humans with alien species. It was part of the Galactic Alliance's way of making crews work together. But there was a reason Cabin 14B had been left empty until now. The Villari were different, not dangerous, just strange. Other crew members had whispered about their habits, eating in silence, tilting their heads when listening, watching people with a focus that made you feel like your thoughts were being weighed and measured. Jonas was not sure he was ready for that kind of roommate. When he reached the crew quarters deck, the narrow hallway smelled faintly of recycled air and machine oil. He stopped outside Cabin 14B, took a deep breath, and opened the sliding door. The cabin was small, even by deep space standards, just 2 narrow beds on opposite walls, a shared desk between them, and a storage unit at the foot of each bed. The air inside felt cooler than the rest of the ship, almost crisp. Standing near the far bed was Lieutenant Slira. She was taller than Jonas had expected, at least a head above him, with long limbs and a posture that seemed both alert and at ease. Her feather fur was mostly white with streaks of soft gray, and under the cabin's light it shimmered like frost on glass. Her eyes were a deep, iridescent gold, and when she looked at him, Jonas felt the same way he imagined a field mouse might feel when a hawk stared down from above. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. "You are Jonas Hale." Her voice was low but clear, with a faint musical tone that almost made each word sound like part of a song. Jonas nodded. "Yes. That's me. Looks like we're bunkmates." Her golden eyes moved over him slowly, studying him in a way that made him shift uncomfortably. But then, to his surprise, she nodded in a way that seemed almost pleased. "Good. I will arrange my side of the nest." "You may arrange yours," she said simply. "Nest?" Jonas repeated. Before he could stop himself, Slira walked to the storage unit and began removing neatly folded blankets and a few personal items. "A place to rest," she explained. "Your kind calls it a bed." Jonas tried to hide a smile. "Right. Bed. Got it?" As she worked, she moved with deliberate precision, folding her blanket over the bed in perfectly straight lines. Her claws. No, not claws exactly, more like thick, curved nails, tapped softly against the metal frame. She placed a small carved object on the desk, a figure shaped like some kind of bird. Jonas guessed it was from her homeworld. He unpacked his own things more slowly, setting down a framed photo of his younger sister, a well-worn paperback novel, and his personal comm device. The two of them worked in silence for several minutes. Every so often, Jonas caught Slira glancing at him, not in a suspicious way, but as if she was quietly filing away details. When the intercom buzzed, announcing the evening meal, Jonas hesitated. "Do you want it?" he began, but Slira was already heading for the door. "I will join the others," she said without looking back. The mess hall was crowded, but Jonas managed to find a seat across from Slira. She ate quietly, each movement precise, while the rest of the crew chatted around them. At one point, A human engineer leaned over to Jonas with a grin. "You're in one for B now, huh? Good luck, man." Jonas frowned. "Why?" The engineer just chuckled. "You'll see." Back in the cabin later, Jonas tried to focus on his novel, but his mind kept drifting. He wondered what the engineer had meant. He also couldn't stop thinking about the way Slira had looked at him when they first met, as if she were measuring not just his height and build, but something deeper. Slira returned from a late meeting, moving quietly so as not to disturb him. "Lights too low," she said, and the cabin dimmed to a soft blue glow. Jonas put his book away, lay down, and pulled the thin ship's blanket over himself. He closed his eyes, listening to the hum of the ship's engines. It must have been less than 5 minutes before he felt movement beside him. Jonas's eyes opened in surprise. Slira was crossing the narrow space between their beds. Without a word, she sat on the edge of his bed, then lay down beside him. Her long arm slid around his middle, pulling him closer until his back rested against the soft, warm surface of her feathered chest. Jonas began, startled, but she spoke first. "You sleep warm," she murmured, her voice almost drowsy. "Like a home nest." He froze. What?" But she had already closed her eyes. Her breathing deep and steady, her warmth spread through the thin blanket like a living heater. Jonas lay there stiffly for a while, his mind racing. Was this some kind of Velari custom? A mistake? Did she even realize this wasn't normal for humans? After several minutes, his own body began to relax despite his confusion. The ship's hum and her slow breathing blurred together into a strange rhythm. And before he knew it, sleep began to pull at him. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he thought of what the engineer had said earlier. "You'll see. Now." He was starting to think he understood. Jonas woke up to the sound of the ship's soft morning chime, a slow, rising tone meant to be less irritating than an alarm. His eyes blinked open, and for a moment he forgot where he was. The cabin's soft blue night light had faded, replaced by the pale golden glow of morning mode. And then he remembered. He was still lying on his side, and behind him, Lieutenant Slira was still there, her arm draped around him like a blanket, her steady breath warm against the back of his neck. Jonas lay very still, wondering if she would move first, but Slira didn't seem in any hurry. When she finally stirred, she loosened her hold and pushed herself up with slow, graceful movements. "You did not move much," she said, her golden eyes calm as always. "Good. Means you slept deeply." Jonas sat up, rubbing the back of his head. Yeah, sure. I guess I did." She stood and walked to the small corner sink, washing her hands in the trickle of recycled water. In the ice plains of Velar, nestmates would hold together all night. Movement wasted heat. Stillness meant survival. Jonas hesitated. Right? Except this ship has climate control. No ice plains here. Slira gave him a faint, almost playful tilt of her head. Old habits, they remain, even in warm places. Jonas didn't know how to answer that, so he just shrugged and went to change into his duty uniform. It was only the first night, and already this assignment was unlike anything he had imagined. The day passed in its usual rhythm. Jonas had his morning duties assisting the captain with mission reports, then joined the engineering team for a systems check. The Orion Dawn was preparing for a long jump into deep space, so everyone was busy running diagnostics. Even so, Jonas found his thoughts wandering back to Slira as strange behavior. He had heard of alien customs before, the Trivan handshake that involved tapping foreheads, the Racker habit of eating dessert before the main meal, but none of them involved crawling into someone's bed without asking. And yet, she didn't seem to think it was strange. To her, it was just normal. By the time Jonas returned to the cabin that evening, Slira was already there. She was seated at the desk, her long fingers carefully carving something from a block of pale wood. Small curls of shavings had fallen across the desk surface, making art. Jonas asked. She looked up, her golden eyes catching the light. "Memory marker," she said simply. "Every mission, I carve one. This one will be shaped like the star we pass next." Jonas nodded. impressed by the smooth lines she had already cut into the wood. "That's pretty good," she studied him for a moment, then asked, "And you? Do you make anything to mark time?" Jonas shook his head with a small laugh. "Not really. I just take pictures and keep them in my compad." "Pictures fade in memory," Slira replied, returning her attention to the carving. "Things you make with your hands, they last." Jonas wasn't sure how to respond to that either. There was something about the way she spoke, calm, measured, that made every sentence sound like part of a lesson. Later that night, after dinner, Jonas decided to try reading before bed again. He lay down on his side, the thin blanket pulled up to his shoulders. He wasn't surprised when, only a few minutes after lights dimmed, he heard the soft pad of Slira's footsteps. Without a word, she lay down behind him again, her arms sliding over him in that same gentle but firm way. Jonas cleared his throat. "You know, humans don't usually sleep like this unless they're family or close friends." "I know," she said simply. Jonas turned his head slightly, trying to see her face in the dim light. "Then, why?" There was a pause. "Then," Slira answered, "when I was very young, I had a smaller creature, a sky moth kit. It slept beside me every night until it grew large enough to fly away. You are smaller than me, warm. Like the kit, it feels right." Jonas blinked. "So, I'm like your pet." Her golden eyes met his in the dark. "Not a pet, a comfort." Jonas didn't know whether to laugh or feel insulted. Instead, he let out a slow breath and said, "All right, but if you're going to keep doing this, I should at least know if it's going to make me the talk of the ship." She tilted her head slightly, a movement Jonas was starting to recognize as her version of a smile. "Let them talk. Words are just air." Over the next few nights, the routine continued. No matter what kind of day they had, Slira would always settle beside him once the lights dimmed. At first, Jonas thought he would never get used to it, but soon he found himself falling asleep faster than he had on any mission before. It wasn't just the warmth. It was the strange sense of calm that came from her steady breathing, the way her presence seemed to anchor the cabin in quiet stillness still. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than just habit. One evening, while most of the crew was relaxing in the mess hall, Jonas found himself sitting across from an older crew member, a human navigator named Clark. Clark had been on the Orion Dawn for years and seemed to know everyone's quirks. So, Clark said with a smirk, "You and Slira. How's cabin life?" Jonas hesitated. "Fine. She's quiet. Keeps to herself." And Clark pressed, "And she's got this thing where she—" Jonas trailed off, unsure how much to say. Clark said knowingly, leaning back. "Yeah, the Velari do that sometimes. It's not a bad thing, you know. Mean she trusts you." Jonas frowned. "Trust me, Velari don't share it. Sleep space with just anyone," Clark explained. "It's a survival thing from their homeworld. Cold nights, dangerous storms. They choose one nestmate to guard warmth. If she's picked you, that's a sign." Jonas leaned back, thinking about that. Maybe it wasn't strange after all, at least not for her. That night, when Slira settled beside him again, Jonas didn't tense up like he had the first few times. Instead, he let the quiet hum of the ship mix with the slow rhythm of her breathing. "You still wonder why?" she asked suddenly in the dark. Jonas gave a small laugh, maybe a little. Her voice was calm, almost soft. In the void, there are few things more valuable than trust. You will learn, and then you will understand. Jonas didn't answer right away, but somewhere between her words and the warmth of her arm, he found himself drifting into the kind of deep, dreamless sleep he hadn't had in years. And for the first time since joining the Orion Dawn, the idea of sharing a cabin with Slira didn't feel strange anymore. It felt safe. The Orion Dawn had been sailing through deep space for 12 days without stopping. Outside the viewports, the stars drifted slowly, stretched into faint lines by the ship's steady sublight speed. Inside, the crew moved in their usual rhythm, working in shifts, checking systems, sharing short meals in the mess hall. Jonas had started to settle into life with Slira. The first few nights had been strange. But now her quiet presence and nightly nesting didn't feel so unusual. In fact, he had to admit he was sleeping better than on any other mission. Still, a part of him was curious, maybe even suspicious, about why this mattered so much to her. He got his chance to find out when the Orion Dawn stopped at an asteroid supply station. The station wasn't much to look at, just a cluster of metal domes bolted to the rock, connected by narrow tunnels. Jonas had been there once before, and it hadn't changed. The place smelled faintly of dust and warm metal, and the walls hummed with the vibration of the station's life support systems. The captain allowed the crew a few hours of shore leave before resupply and refueling. Jonas wandered through the small market, a ring-shaped hallway where merchants sold food, tools, and small handcrafted goods. He stopped to examine a set of carved wooden figures, noticing they looked similar to the ones Slira had placed on their desk. The merchant, a Velari, older and with streaks of silver in his feather fur, noticed Jonas looking. "You have a Velari in your crew?" the merchant asked, his voice calm but carrying a hint of curiosity. Jonas nodded. "Yeah, we share a cabin, actually." The merchant's golden eyes studied him for a moment. Then a small smile formed. "Then you must be her nestmate." Jonas hesitated. "Nestmate? That's what she calls it too. Of course," the merchant said, folding his hands. "It is an old tradition from our ice homeworld. When the cold storms came, no Velari survived alone. We slept in groups, each choosing one or two to hold through the night. It was not just warmth. It was trust. You would not hold someone who might harm you in your sleep." Jonas frowned slightly. "But the ship isn't cold. Why would she still do that?" The merchant's eyes softened. "Traditions are not about need. They're about identity. To be Velari is to remember where we came from. For some, the nestmate bond is more than habit. It is a way to show someone they are part of the heart, not just the crew." Jonas wasn't sure what to say to that. Part of him felt honored. The way the merchant spoke made it sound like something rare. But another part of him wondered if Slira saw him as something else entirely. A friend, a protector, or just a convenient source of warmth. When Jonas returned to the Orion Dawn, Slira was already in the cabin. She had arranged a small pile of new blankets on her bed, likely purchased at the market. Without looking up from folding them, she asked, "You enjoyed your walk?" "Yeah," Jonas said, setting his bag down. "Ran into another Velari. He told me about the whole nestmate thing." Slira paused for a moment, then turned her head slightly toward him. "And what did you think?" Jonas shrugged. "I guess it makes sense. Just wasn't expecting it to mean trust." Her golden eyes held his for a long moment. "It is trust, and it is choice." Something in her tone made Jonas think she wouldn't say more on the subject, so he didn't press. That night, the nesting routine continued as usual. But now, Jonas couldn't help thinking about the merchant's words. Was this her way of saying he was part of her heart, or was it just second nature to her? The hum of the ship and her steady breathing made it harder to stay awake pondering the question. Eventually, he drifted into the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that came only when he felt completely safe. 2 days later, the crew faced a situation that tested everyone's comfort zones. A navigational relay ahead was reported offline, forcing the Orion Dawn to drop out of hyperspace early and reroute through a dense asteroid belt. The belt wasn't dangerous if navigated carefully, but it was tedious, constant course corrections, scanning for debris, adjusting shields. Jonas was assisting the captain on the bridge when a loud vibration shook the ship. Lights flickered, and the steady hum of the engines dipped for a few seconds before stabilizing again. Shield scrape. The helmsman reported, "Large fragment, no breach." The captain nodded, but Jonas noticed Slira's name appear on the status screen. She was in the maintenance section near the shield generator when his shift ended. Jonas made his way down there, partly out of curiosity and partly out of concern. He found Slira crouched beside a control panel, her long fingers moving over the damaged components with careful precision. "Need a hand?" Jonas asked. She didn't look up. "The shield node is cracked. Not dangerous yet, but it reminds me of home." Jonas tilted his head. "Home?" She set down her tool and finally looked at him. The storms on Velar would tear the sky apart if the shield around a nest failed. The cold would come in, fast, unstoppable. You would have only minutes before the frost took you. Jonas shivered slightly, even in the warm air. That sounds brutal. It taught us, she said quietly. When the shield fails, you hold to your nestmate. You share every breath until safety comes. Jonas didn't answer. He was beginning to see that for Slira, this wasn't just a quirky habit. It was survival carved deep into her mind. Over the next few days, the asteroid belt slowed their journey. The ship's carters were quieter, the crew moving carefully to avoid accidents during the constant small course corrections. Jonas and Slira fell into an easy routine, working their shifts, sharing short conversations, and, at night, the unspoken ritual of sleeping close. But Jonas noticed something else. She was watching him more closely now, not in the strange, piercing way she had at first, but with a kind of quiet attention, as if measuring his reactions to every small challenge the ship faced. One evening, while they were both in the cabin, Jonas decided to ask the question that had been bothering him. Back on the station, he began. That merchant said nestmates were chosen carefully, that it wasn't random. Slira set down the carving she'd been working on and turned her golden gaze on him. It is not random. So, why me? She was silent for a few seconds. Then, with her usual calm tone, she said, because you do not fear stillness. Many humans fill the air with noise when they are uncomfortable. You do not. You share space without trying to take it. Jonas blinked, caught off guard. That's it. That is enough, she replied, and returned to her carving. Jonas wasn't sure how to feel about that answer. But later that night, when the lights dimmed and she took her usual place beside him, he realized something. Whatever her reason, she had decided he was worth trusting. And in the cold emptiness of space, that might be more valuable than anything else. In the quiet of the cabin, Jonas thought again about what she had said. You do not fear stillness. It wasn't just about sleeping close. It was about being the kind of person who could face the void without flinching. He wasn't sure if he'd earned that yet, but he was starting to think he wanted to. The asteroid belt was finally behind them. The Orion Dawn had returned to open space, and the crew was looking forward to an easy hyperspace jump to their next waypoint. Systems were stable, the engines hummed with their usual steady rhythm, and the carters were filled with quiet chatter again. Jonas was in the mess hall, halfway through a cup of hot tea, when the first sign of trouble came. A faint flicker of the lights overhead. It was small enough that most people ignored it, but Jonas had been in space long enough to know that lights didn't flicker without a reason. A second later, the ship shook. It wasn't a violent impact, more like a deep, distant thud that seemed to come from the heart of the vessel. The lights flickered again, this time staying dim for several seconds before brightening. Then came the captain's voice over the intercom, calm but urgent. All crew to standby stations. Engineering reports of power distribution fault. Maintain position until further notice. Jonas set down his cup and started for the door. He almost bumped into Slira, who had appeared in the hallway, her golden eyes sharp and alert. What's going on? Jonas asked. Power loss, she said. Simply, not yet critical, but close. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Jonas followed Slira to the maintenance level, where engineers were already pulling open panels and tracing the fault. A quick scan showed the problem. One of the main power conduits had overloaded, tripping several connected systems. The ship could still run, but many of its non-essential systems were shutting down to save energy, including the heating system. Within the first hour, the air in the corridors began to cool. At first, it was just a noticeable chill. But by the second hour, the cold had settled into Jonas's hands and face. Crew members put on extra jackets from storage, their breath just starting to fog. In the air. Jonas and Slira returned to their cabin to wait out the repairs. The thin metal walls were already cold to the touch. The temperature readout on the wall dropped by another degree every few minutes. How long do you think until they fix it? Jonas asked, rubbing his arms. Slira's voice was steady, but Jonas noticed a slight tightness in her movements. If the conduit is cracked, they will need to reroute power manually. Hours, maybe longer. By the third hour, the cabin felt like a freezer. Jonas had pulled on his thickest duty jacket, but the cold still crept through. He glanced at Slira, her feather, for help, but even she was curling her long limbs closer to herself. A faint shiver moving through her shoulders. "You're actually cold?" Jonas asked, surprised. "Thalari are made for the cold," she said, her breath visible now. "But even we have limits." Jonas thought about the merchant's words back on the station, about how on Velar, when the shield failed, the only chance was to hold to your nestmate and share every breath until safety came. She didn't need to ask. She just stood, crossed the narrow cabin, and without a word, pulled him into her arms. This time it wasn't like before, a casual habit, a quirk of culture. This was deliberate, firm, and unshakable. Her arms wrapped around him tightly, her body curved to shield him from the cold. He could feel the slow, deep draw of her breathing as she adjusted to his warmth. Jonas's first instinct was to say something, to make a joke, but the seriousness in her golden eyes stopped him. She was doing this to keep them both alive. The hours stretched on. The cold made it hard to think, harder still to stay awake. Jonas could feel his own muscles trembling, trying to create heat. Slira shifted every so often, tucking him closer against her chest, making sure no space was left for the cold to creep in. He could hear the faint hum of emergency lights in the quarter outside, but inside their small cabin, there was only the sound of their breathing and the occasional faint creak of the ships. Metal as it contracted in the cold. Jonas's mind began to wander in the haze of half-sleep. He thought about her words in Part 3, "You do not fear stillness." He realized now how important that was. If he had panicked, if he had pulled away, their shared warmth would have been lost to the freezing air, sometime deep in the night cycle. The intercom crackled weakly. Power reroute complete. Heat systems coming online. Full restoration in 20 minutes. Jonas opened his eyes to see Slira watching him, her breath still visible in the cold. A faint, almost invisible smile touched the corners of her mouth. "We made it," she said softly. Jonas gave a small laugh. "Yeah, guess the whole nestmate thing works." She tilted her head. A movement he had learned meant approval. "It is why our people are still here. Alone, the cold takes you. Together, you wait for the sun." As warmth slowly returned to the cabin, Jonas reluctantly shifted away from her. The air was still chilly, but already the frost in his breath was fading. He stretched his stiff limbs, surprised by how much energy the cold had drained from him. Slira returned to her bed, pulling her blanket around her shoulders. She didn't speak for a moment, then said quietly, "You did not try to leave. You did not fight the stillness. Many would have." Jonas shrugged, though he felt the weight of the words. "Guess I'm getting used to it. You understand." "More than you think," she replied, and then, in that calm, certain voice of hers, added, "You will be a good nestmate for the storms ahead." Jonas frowned slightly. Storms ahead. But she had already closed her eyes. The faint warmth of the newly restored heating filling the small cabin. Jonas lay back, staring at the ceiling for a long time, wondering if she meant it literally, or if she was talking about something else entirely. That night, Jonas understood something he hadn't before. The nestmate bond wasn't just about warmth, or even about survival in the physical sense. It was about trust, the kind that didn't need words, that didn't break under strain, that could face the worst of the void together. And somewhere deep inside, he realized he didn't mind the thought of being Slira as living plush toy for the rest of the journey. Not at all. The humming sound of the Orion Dawn's engines returned slowly, like the heartbeat of a great animal waking from sleep. Lights flickered in the Carters. The heaters began to push warm air again. After hours of freezing cold, the crew could finally breathe in comfort. Jonas sat on the edge of his bunk, his arms still wrapped loosely around Slira. They had not let go yet, even though the temperature was rising. The feeling of warmth and safety was not something they wanted to break. Slira's fur-like plumage was still puffed up, her breathing steady now. Her golden eyes met Jonas's, and for a moment there was no noise, no rush. Just the quiet understanding between two people who had kept each other alive. You did not let go, she said softly, her voice carrying a rare hint of emotion. Jonas smiled. Neither did you? She tilted her head, the way Valari often did when thinking deeply. I used to believe humans were only warm in body. Now I see you are warm in spirit too. You gave more heat than you could spare. Jonas chuckled, rubbing his arms. I guess that makes me both a plush toy and a space heater. Her feathers rustled and what he had learned was a Valari laugh. Yes. But more than that, you are a nestmate who does not run. When the cold comes, the crew quarters door slid open and First Officer Brenna stepped in. She gave them both an approving nod. Medical reports are in. You two were the most stable during the blackout. Everyone else had mild hypothermia. You probably saved each other's lives. Jonas felt a bit embarrassed at the praise. We just did what we had to. Brenna smirked. Well, keep doing it. We need more crew like that. When she left, Slira slowly pulled back from the embrace. She stood, stretching her long arms like a bird spreading wings. The humans on this ship, she said, will tell this story later, yes? Probably, Jonas replied, and they'll make it sound more heroic than it really was. Her golden eyes glimmered. It was heroic, because in Valari belief, sharing your body heat in the deep cold is the same as giving part of your life. Jonas paused at that. That's actually kind of beautiful. Over the next few days, the Orion Dawn returned to normal. Engineers fixed the damaged power conduits. The kitchen was warm again. The corridors were full of chatter, and the crew's frozen breath was a memory. But for Jonas and Slira, something had changed. Before the blackout, their nightly nesting habit had been one-sided. Something Slira did out of comfort, with Jonas just letting it happen. Now, it was different. It was mutual. It wasn't about habit anymore. It was about trust. One evening, after the ship had completed a long cargo drop at a remote station, Jonas walked into their cabin and found Slira already curled up on her bunk. She looked at him with that same curious head tilt. It is time, she said simply. Jonas grinned. Time for what? For warmth sharing, she replied. As if it was the most obvious thing in the galaxy. He climbed into his bunk, and without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around him again. Her plumage smelled faintly of the herbal oils Valari used to clean themselves. The soft, steady rhythm of her breathing was oddly calming. You know, Jonas said after a few minutes. This isn't so strange anymore. Slira's voice was quiet. It was never strange. You only thought it was. Jonas thought back to when they first met, how odd it had felt to be pulled into a hug. On the first night, he had been confused, maybe even a little uncomfortable. But now it felt natural. Like the cold void of space was far away, unable to touch them. One day, while eating lunch in the mess hall, two human engineers teased Jonas about his Valari fan club. They had noticed how often Slira stayed near him, even during work shifts. She's got you wrapped around her finger, one joked. Jonas just smiled. No, we've got each other's backs. Big difference. Slira, sitting beside him, heard the comment but didn't react in annoyance. Instead, she leaned slightly closer to Jonas and said, humans use strange words, but I understand the meaning. They see our bond. Their bond did not stay a private thing. Soon, other crew members began asking questions about Valari traditions. Why they valued physical closeness, how it related to their survival history, and what it meant to choose someone as a nestmate. Slira explained to them one evening in the recreation room. When the ice storms came on my world, you did not survive alone. You slept pressed together, sharing every bit of heat, because the night could kill without warning. A nestmate was not just a friend, they were part of your life. The crew listened quietly, some with thoughtful expressions. Jonas sat in the back, watching her speak with calm confidence. He realized that their little cabin habit had turned into something bigger, a piece of cultural exchange. Weeks later, as the Orion Dawn approached its next long voyage, the captain held a crew meeting. He mentioned the blackout incident and thanked the entire team for working together. But when he spoke about survival, he glanced at Jonas and Slira. You two reminded us, the captain said, that in space, we are each other's lifelines. Technology keeps us alive, but so does trust. Never forget that. After the meeting, Jonas and Slira returned to their cabin. Slira looked at him, feathers shimmering faintly under the cabin light. I think, she said slowly, I will keep you as a nestmate for many cycles. Jonas laughed. Good. I was planning on keeping you around too. They settled in for the night, outside. The cold stars shone in the endless black. Inside, in a small cabin on a ship traveling faster than light, the crewmates shared the simplest of protections, warmth. It was no longer just a survival habit. It was a promise, silent but unbreakable dot no matter where the Orion dawn went. No matter what dangers waited in the void, they knew one thing, in the freezing dark, they would always have each other, and in that truth, they found a comfort greater than any blanket, heater, or shield. The ship's engines thrummed softly as they drifted to sleep. The human and the Velari, a bond forged in cold, carried forward into the warm heart of friendship.